Okay. Assignment 2. You guys want to go over quickly? Or are you good? Assignment 2. Assignment 2, you submitted already. Was it already due?
No, it's due.
It's due next week.
But they moved it. Didn't they move it? They only moved the financial factor. But John, I submitted.
Oh, you did? Okay, so we're good with that. All right, that's fine. Yeah, the exam's been moved to the 15th of June, I've heard. MAC3701 and 2 on the same day. I don't know why.
What happens if you do both?
You have, it's like 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon.
Is this like an hour break and then
So the reason for that is, oh, you managed to open it. Is it flooded in there? Okay, come, let's go. We're going to go to 9. Did you manage? Okay. All right. Shall we put aircons on? Otherwise we're going to die of heat. Is it hot? Okay. No, they were already here this morning fixing the aircon, so the aircons are fixed, but they still sound like they... No, now they're fixing block. This is a boiler. I don't know what the difference is between a boiler and a geyser. And it's leaking, and then that's my carpet's all wet at the back there, which is what this smell. Oh, maybe, yeah. No, it's been off. It's been off for years, but now it's leaking. I don't know how that happened. You would imagine it would be off and empty. I was about to shout and kick him out. Okay, we're going back now. Assignment 2 is done. We're going to go back and finish some of the things we didn't quite finish the last time. And the first section that I thought we would start with mergers, but I realized that when we were looking at investment decisions, there were a couple of things we didn't look at. So when we did investment decisions, there were a couple of things we didn't look at. We didn't look at capital rationing. Capital rationing is when I have a fixed amount of capital that I have to invest, and I need to decide how to invest it. We didn't look at investments with different capital amounts and how we compare those investments of different capital amounts using Npv. We didn't look at investments with different lives, because again, if we have an investment that, if we have an investment with the same NPV, 2 investments with the same NPV, but the one has a 3-year life and the other one has a 5-year life, obviously you're going to have a preference for one over the other. And with different capital amounts the same, if we have 2 investments with the same NPV, but the one requires a higher capital investment and the other one a smaller capital investment, that's going to change your decision too. Do you agree? And then the other thing that we didn't look at is we didn't really look at IRR and some of the assumptions behind IRR. And today we're going to learn to do a new IRR called a modified IRR. And so those are the things we didn't look at when we did investments the other day, because I wanted to just do the basics so that you could finish that assignment. Yeah, we did. Do you remember the water question where they had to decide between Sandton and Maritzburg? Okay, so I'm going to start with the investments with different I'm going to start at the beginning with the capital rationing and investments with different capital amounts. All right, so capital rationing, let's start with that. Capital rationing is a scenario that you find in most businesses, that the amount of capital that a business has to invest is limited, and they need to make a decision between different projects, which one to invest in and which one not to invest in, isn't it? And when we're looking at capital rationing, we look at two different types of projects. We look at projects that are indivisible, and we look at projects that are divisible. Projects that are indivisible are things like machines, warehouses, restaurants, physical projects, plant, physical projects. When we have these physical projects that are not divisible, the way we decide how to ration the money we have is trial and error. We use trial and error, and the objective is to get the highest NPV. The highest NPV. So, I think there's an example. No. Here's an example in your study guides on page 60. So, a company that has 50,000 Rand to invest has these available projects to them, isn't it? So what we do is we work with trial and error, and we look at all the possible scenarios. Yeah. So a company that has 50 million Rand can either just do A. Do you agree? Just do A. If they do A, they have an NPV of 4.5. Or they can do B, C, and E. Do you agree? They could do B, C, E. B is 20 million investment, that one's 20 million, and that one's 10. So BCE would be 2 plus 2, 4.2, plus 1.5, what's that? 4, 5.7. So if they do BCE, it's 5.7, the NPV, isn't it? They could also do BDE with their 50 million. Do you agree? If they did BDE, then it would be 2 plus 2.7, 4.7, plus 1.5 is 6.2. Is that right? 6.2. They could also do C, D, and E. Yeah? C, D, E. That would also add up to 50 million. CDE would be probably even more than that, because this is 4.9 plus 1.5 is 6.4. Is that right? 6.4. And that's an example of capital rationing when our projects are not divisible. So I've got 50 million Rand to invest. I can buy a restaurant or a holiday, a hotel or something like that. It will cost the whole 50 million. That's my return, my NPV. Or I can choose to buy a couple of things, isn't it? Maybe a McDonald's franchise and a Spur and a garage, a Shell garage or something like that. So I look at the different possibilities, and I look at how I could spend my 50 million. And do you agree? I can't buy a piece of one. I can't buy a piece of the hotel and a piece of the McDonald's franchise. I have to buy either the whole thing or not at all. So capital rationing, when our projects are not divisible, is done like this, trial and error. And the objective is to find they call it the basket, the combination that gives us the highest NPV. Yeah. So in an exam scenario, they could give you something like this, where they ask you, they tell you how much money you've got, they tell you that you've done some research and you've identified these projects and you can spend this money. Yeah. When we have projects that are divisible, these ones, we're looking at projects that are investment type projects. Unit trusts, shares, bonds, debentures, those kind of investments. Do you agree? I could buy 10 million rand, or I could buy 20, or I could buy 5, or I could buy 50. However much you've got, you can go buy. Do you agree with that? Those projects are divisible. What we do with projects that are divisible, and we are comparing different ones, is we work out this thing called Npvi. Npvi stands for Npv index. Npv index. Npv index is essentially looking at the NPV of cash in divided by the NPV of cash out. So the way that we do the calculation is that we say NPV plus investment over investment. Do you agree that that's that calc? NPV plus investment over investment. What this NPV index does is it tells you for every rand invested how much return you're getting. It tells you what the return is, NPV, for every rand that you invest. So if we go back to that example, there was an earlier example, but I'm not even going to bother to look at it. If I go back to that example where we had the 4 projects and we had the NPVs, and I said to you now, these are no longer hotels and restaurants and service stations, garages. These are unit trusts, shares, debentures, bonds, and you can buy them in any amount. Yeah. So what you could do is you could buy 2.5 Bs for your 50 million rand. Or you could buy 5 Es for your 50 million rand, isn't it? Or 1A for your 50 million rand. Then do you agree it makes sense to look at what every rand is giving me, isn't it? So I want you for these to work out the NPVI for me. Remember, there's my investment, there's my NPV. So the formula for NPVI is NPV plus investment over investment. For every rand invested, how much am I getting back? Yeah, and work out for me those NPVIs. And this would be now for divisible projects, NPVIs. Because I would be able to invest in multiples or pieces of each one. This one here is indivisible. Did you bring a pencil box today? Ah, okay. No calculator though. Okay, you've got answers? The first one? 1.09. Okay, second one? 1.1.
1.11.
1.1.
No, sorry, the next one.
This one is 1.1. And then this one's 111. And then
1.14.
114. And 115. Okay, so what that's telling me is that for every rand that I invest, I get 1 rand and 9 cents back with that one, and with A, and with E, with every rand I invest, I get 1 rand 15 back. So now you are a financial manager in a business, or you are an investment advisor, and somebody who has 50 million rand to invest wants to know whether they should invest in A, B, C, D, or E. They don't want to buy a restaurant or a hotel or a service station or a franchise. They want to hold investments that are just investments, right? Not something they have to work at. And so they've come up with these options, A, B, C, D, E. Which one do they buy? E. Yeah, and they buy 5 E's, 50 million rands worth of E. Yeah, because if they buy 5 E's, you would be multiplying this NPV by 5, and it'll give you the highest NPV of all the NPVs, isn't it? You can see it will definitely give you more than A. And so if we decide to do that one, we would then do E. So this is capital rationing. It's nothing major. Do you agree? It's just when you have a certain amount of capital available at your disposal. And in a business, your decisions are more likely to be the blue ones, your indivisibles, isn't it? Because you have a certain amount of capital to spend this year. And you've identified certain opportunities for investment. They may include new IT system, new factory, new fleet of vehicles, isn't it? Different things in your business. And you've identified the NPVs of each one. And then you go and say, with my 50 million, where is it better spent? Isn't it? Do I spend all of it on one project? Do I split it among projects? And remember, at this stage, we are just doing number crunching, isn't it? So from a number crunching perspective, for indivisible, we said we should do project C, D, and E. But from a qualitative point of view, non-financial point of view, there may be reasons why you would rather do A, isn't it, for example? But there's always 2 aspects in decision making, financial, non-financial. This other one, the red one, is more for divisible projects. Or Npvi can also be used, if I go back to the beginning of my lecture, over here, where I have investments with different capital amounts. Over here, I would also use Npvi to then make my decision. And if you look in your study guides on page 56, Mabula has 1.5 million rand, and they must choose between the following 2 divisible projects. Between the 2 projects. Cash flows for A and cash flows for B are given. WACC is 12. So we have 2 projects. They have different capital investments, isn't it? This one has a capital investment of 1 million. This one has a capital investment of 1.2 million. You found it in your books? So the first step, of course, is to do my NPV calcs, isn't it? I'm not going to do NPV calcs with you. You know how to do them. They've used factors. They're probably even coming out with a different NPV to what we would have got. But if we look at A, positive NPV, 233,000, and project B, positive NPV, 242,000. So initial reaction is, I should take B. Do you agree? B is bigger. B is 242 versus A, which is 233. But when we look again, look, this one is only 1 million rand. The other one is 1.2 million rand. So do you agree that if I was just looking purely at numbers like that, I would have to add onto here interest on the 200,000 rand that I would have left over that I wouldn't need to invest in this one, isn't it? And that would tip it perhaps. But the calculation they do is the Npvi, or sometimes they call it PI, profitability index, or net present value index. And when they do the index, we add the million there and we divide by the million, 1.23 for this project, and for this project, 1.2, what the, yeah, 1.20. They add 1.2 million there and they divide by 1.2 million. So if you're looking at it just from that point of view, you should rather pick A than B for your R1,000,000, isn't it? But if you get given interest numbers, we actually work it out based on interest numbers. So what we would say is we have R1.5 million. The differential of the investments is 200,000. So if I could invest the 200,000 and earn interest, would I get more than the difference or not over the time, isn't it? Because it's all good and well to say, I'll take the one with the highest index, but if you're sitting with the money doing nothing under your mattress, then you should rather invest it in even in something that's maybe giving you a slightly lower return. Do you agree? All right, so that's the answer 2 for this first bit. And these questions get asked sometimes in exams for very few marks. Capital rationing and Npvi investments with different amounts. What I got for you, because we don't have too many past papers for this exam, isn't it? We've got a few only. But what I've made copies of for you is previous assignments. Those are always useful to work through, do you agree? And this was assignment 2 in 2014. In assignment 2 in 2014, there was a little capital rationing question. Pass it on. We can have a look. So the first question in assignment 2 of 2014 was a valuation question for 10 marks, dividend valuation. And then question 2 is the one that I want to look at. I think I have a copy of it, yeah. No, I thought I had it. I will copy it in. But question 2 of assignment 2 for 2014 says the company has 100,000 Rand to invest. They need to decide between the following indivisible investments. Indivisible is trial and error. Project A, B, C, different investment amounts, different NPVs. Calculate the Npvi for each of the projects and advise which project they should invest in. Yeah, they shouldn't have said divisible, isn't it? They said indivisible, but we don't really use Npvi for indivisible. We use the basket. And then what are the assumptions of NPV? So I just want you to do those for me, that quick question for me. I'm going to just find it so that I can pull it into the presentation quickly. Usually these MAC questions have some big ones, and then one of the questions is made up of smaller questions. Are you familiar with that? So this could be for 5 marks or 8 marks, a little mini question, a part A or B or C of a third question or fourth question in the paper. They used to ask multiple choice questions, but they stopped doing that, and now they just ask these little questions instead. Okay, so the question asked you, they said they are indivisible projects. Remember what I said to you about indivisible projects? We don't pick the highest Npvi, but then they did ask you to work out Npvi. So that should have been easy enough to do. You were given the investments, you were given the Npvs, and when we do Npvi, you get these numbers, 139, 105, 115. Yeah? And the best one is project B, 139. So based on Npvi, that's the one we would pick, isn't it? Project B. However, when they conclude, they actually now do say, due to the fact that the projects are indivisible, we select the highest NPV. We don't evaluate according to Npvi. Yeah? So I don't know why they asked you to work it out, though. So we select the highest NPV and we don't evaluate according to Npvi. And the reason for that is that indivisible projects can't be expanded or contracted or combined. They're indivisible, isn't it? a whole project must be undertaken in its entirety. So if we have money to spend, so they say they had 100,000 rand, then they start talking about basket, isn't it? Then they say, if I have 100,000 to spend, I look at NPV and I say, okay, that NPV is 98, so maybe pick that one first, and then the next highest one is this one, isn't it? And pick that one, and then I don't have enough for project C, then I'll just have to have money left over, isn't it? 45,000 rand left over. They then go into that and then they say the company must first select project B, then A, because these have the highest NPVs. But the way they did the NPVs, what you should have really done is you should have done that basket story, isn't it? The basket story would be A plus B, or A plus C, or B plus C, isn't it? Those are all options that we would have had. A plus B, A plus C, or B plus C, those are the options. Or A on its own, B on its own, C on its own, those are also options. But we did have enough to add 2. And when you do those, you do find that this one is the best one, and you can see it by just looking at the numbers that that one's going to be the best one. Yeah. So a really funny little question, hey, but in an exam, we hope they don't lead you astray like that, where they ask you to calculate Npvi for something that you would never use Npvi to make a decision, isn't it? They should have just said to you, it's indivisible projects, those are the investments, those are NPVs, what will you invest in? And then you would have done the baskets and you would have come out with A and B, which is what they've come up with, A and B. They then have some Npv assumptions. Assumptions are that investors are rational, they seek to maximize wealth in terms of cash, capital markets are perfect, investors are risk averse. Okay, just some of those. Sometimes they come up with these bits of theory, isn't it, that we don't learn. So then, that's how it is. Okay, let's go back to the beginning where we were today. And I said I wanted to talk about a couple of things that I hadn't covered last time, capital rationing. And there we looked at another page where we looked at divisible and indivisible. Then when we're looking at assets with different investment amounts or capital amounts, we use Npvi. Then when we're looking at investments with different lives, didn't I write lives? I think not. Different lives. And that's quite an important one, this one here, where we're looking at investments with different lives. It is one that does come up as part of your NPV calc, because it will come up when I'm looking at a keep or replace decision. Or sometimes even when I'm looking at, remember last week when we did the assignment question, we had a new machine and a second-hand machine. Remember the new machine for Santon and the second-hand machine for Pietermaritzburg. In that question, they kept both of the lives 5 years. But if we were looking at the life of the machine, we would have had different lives. Because the new machine would have had a longer life. We were depreciating longer than the existing machine or the second-hand machine, which we would have depreciated shorter. So when you have those decisions between assets that have different lives, and it will always be the case when I'm keeping or replacing, because the asset that I have that I would be keeping would have only a remaining life, whereas the new asset would have a whole life. I have to look at how I make this investment decision. The way the investment decision works is that when we have different lives, we start off by calculating NPV. And then we do this calculation, we make this assumption that there will be, what is the word that they use? Links? Chains. Yeah. They make this assumption that there will be chains. Now let me not use chains. I calculate NPV for both of the assets. Then the assets have different lives. So I would need to be replacing them, isn't it, at intervals. So if, for example, my decision was to have a diesel truck or a petrol truck, and let's assume that the diesel truck lasts 5 years, but the petrol truck only lasts 4 years, I would, at the end of the 5 years, replace the diesel truck and then replace it again and replace it again, isn't it? Whereas the petrol one, I'd have to replace every 4 years. So, in essence, over 20 years, I would have 4 diesel trucks, and over 20 years, I would have 5 petrol trucks, isn't it? So if I'm really trying to compare apples and apples, I'd have to go that far. So what we do when we have these different lives is we make this assumption about chains, that we would need to keep replacing assets, and so therefore we work with annuities. And we ask ourselves, what would be the value if I make the assumption that I'll keep replacing with diesel forever? Or I make the assumption I keep replacing with petrol. Do you agree that if I can get an annuity, in other words, 1 year, what the NPV would be for every 1 year, then I could compare them, isn't it? And so when I have this equivalent, when I have these different lives, I work out this thing called equivalent annual income, EAI, equivalent annual income. And equivalent annual income is then the second piece of your calc. So your first piece is to calculate the NPVs. Then when we have the different lives, we can't compare them. Then we make this assumption that we would keep replacing the asset and we'd have chains of NPVs. And then we calculate the annuity for 1 year, and we do this EAI, equivalent annual income. The way you calculate EAI is that the NPV that you got becomes present value on your calculator. N is life. I is whatever you are using as I, which is usually WACC. And then you compute payment. And what this is giving you is it's giving you the annuity, isn't it? The conversion of that NPV over its life into annual amounts. Do you agree? Then once I have annual amounts, then I can compare. Okay, so all I do is I calculate NPV. Then, because I have the different lives, I have to calculate EAI, equivalent annual income. Equivalent annual income is an annuity. And that's what I'm calculating, an annuity on my calculator. Annuities on my calculator are payment, isn't it? In the other modules, when we have annuities, we plug it in as payment on our calculators. All right, so pull out your financial calculators. I'm talking to Craig. And we're going to look at, okay, that's the solution of that one. Activity 5.6, it's in your study guides on page 63. Or you can look at it on here, it's also fine. So we have 2 projects. Both of the projects are R1 million, which is good, right? We don't have a problem with different investment amounts. And we have project A, which has a 5-year life. And we have project B, which has a 8-year life. So step 1 is to calculate your NPVs. Yeah? So plug in, and we're calculating NPVs at 16%. Target WACC, 16. Interesting, they say target WACC. Target WACC is what? Optimal debt to equity WACC, isn't it? Not current market value WACC, not historical book value WACC. Optimal debt to equity WACC is target WACC. It's the best one to use. Remember I said to you when we were doing WACC. You brought your calculator today, so now I want to see if you can use it. $248,091 and 256,270. Okay, so if you were to base your decision on those numbers, you're going to pick B. B is the highest NPV here, and you would pick B rather than A. However, you're going to get a higher NPV, but it's going to take much longer, isn't it? So now you're going to do EAI, equivalent annual income. Do you get those? No? Why are you clearing? You're so funny. Is that the numbers they get? Yeah, they've used tables, eh? Okay, don't worry. If you're more or less in the pipeline, which you are, they use tables. No, yes. Or you leave it out and then it assumes a zero. But if you want to be sure that it's a zero, make it a zero. So remember, when we use EAI now, we're going to use this as N. This as PV. This as I. And you're going to ask for payment. Still don't know. Did you get it, Junior? Okay, then I'm happy that it's doable on the sharp. The email that I sent you, was that what you wanted, or did you want something else? Okay. I wasn't sure if you were talking about that question or if you were talking about. Yeah, I only say, like, if I get an email, I respond and send it. Otherwise, I can't keep up all the different classes, whatever. Okay, you've got EAIs. What EAIs have you got? And now decision changes, isn't it? And now decision changes to A. And we almost knew that it was going to be, because the NPVs were so close, hey, and it was going to take you an extra 3 years to get that one. We can't just divide by 5 and 8 because of compounding, time value of money, isn't it? So we have to work out annuities. It's easy enough to calculate, do you agree? That what happens in the exam is you forget to do it. You're so busy doing those tables, and you've got the 2 tables with the 2 NPVs, and then you forget that last step, which is, hang on, my one life was 6, my one life is 5, or my one life was 4 and the other one is 6, and you forget to do this last step. And it's worth quite a few marks. Okay, equivalent annual income. You good?
Yeah,
okay, then it's just the red bits. So this becomes PV, that becomes N, and I is 16, and you compute payment. And then the same for B. We're now working out what the annuity is, what the annual amount is over the 5 years for A and over the 8 years for B. And remember that the reason we do this is because we assume those chains. We assume that we would keep replacing A with other A's, which would each have a 5-year life. And when 5 and 8 meet, it's only at 40 years, isn't it? It's the first time they match. But we don't really worry about that. We work on the assumption that we would keep replacing and we would have chains, and we work out annuities. Now you compare and you pick the highest one. Yeah. So every year, if you invest in A, every year you're getting almost 76,000. Whereas when you invest in B, you're only getting 59,000. So you should rather invest in A for every year. Are we good? And now EAI. The PV that you got becomes, the NPV that you got becomes present value on your calculator. Then your N's, for A it's 5, your I is 16, and you compute payment. No, you shouldn't have to do that. No, you should be able to just clear your functions. It's over there. Clear all. There, second function mode is clear all. Not payment, PV. It doesn't matter. Oh, they've changed again. So it's not June the 15th anymore. Or it is now June the 15th. Keeps changing is what you're saying. Okay. All right, so when we look at the two projects, B came out with the highest NPV, so we would be tempted to say go for B rather than A. But when we look at equivalent annual income because of the different lives, your annual NPV for A is 76,000 per annum versus 59,000 per annum, so we should pick A and not B. Yeah. So just remember always, whenever you have questions and you have two to compare, like we did in the assignment, always check the lives. The calculation is the same always until NPV. But then if we have different lives, we have to do this extra step to work out equivalent annual income. Yeah. And remember, all I'm doing is working out the annuity, the payment. Okay. All right, so then we have one last bit that I wanted to cover today, which was, I don't know what happened here because I had written those things in. Oh, no, it's one before, which was IRR and MIRR. Okay, so let me talk to you about IRR. Let me do it down here because I have a blank page before the IRR question that I want you to do, which is this one. Okay. Remember I said to you that IRR is the internal return, internal I. No, let's just say it's the I. It's the I where NPV is 0. Do you remember me saying that to you? IRR is the I where NPV is 0. Yeah? Last year, we used to have to extrapolate and interpolate until we found a place where the answer was 0 when we did the NPV calc, isn't it? But we don't have to do that anymore. We can use our financial calculators. And we just plug the numbers into the financial calculators and we get an answer. So I want you to practice that, although it's exactly the same as what you did before, but we haven't, I think, ever pressed that IRR button, so I want you to practice pressing it. Here are two projects. Cash flow for project A and B. You'll see that both projects have the same useful life and the same capital investment, which is unlikely in real life, but there it is. I want you for both of these projects to work out for me the NPV and the IRR. You do not have to re-enter the data. You do not have to re-enter the data. So when you plug it in, you can just see if that comes out a different color. I don't think it will. When you plug it in, you just press the IRR button at the same time that you've pressed the NPV button. So NPV and IRR is what I want for the two projects. It should be the exact same function that you've been using up to now, and then I think there's just a different button you press. You should have come out at those. Did you? What was the WACC that we were using? 14. Where's the Npv button? Is there an Npv button?
Like when you look at the calculation, I see, yeah?
Oh, it's up here.
Yeah, here's
It's not here.
No, here's the MPV out with that. Down here.
We got the MPV, we don't have the RR.
What do you write? Alright, Alberton.
All right, let's see. Can you see something funny in the answers? If I use NPV, which project am I going to pick? A. If I use IRR, which project am I going to pick? Oh, okay. So now what do I do? We have a problem, isn't it? We got ching chong cha. It is a problem that we have with IRR. And it's because of an assumption. IRR assumes that cash in is reinvested at the IRR, whereas NPV assumes reinvestment at WACC. And so when you have two things happening, so this is the assumptions. IRR, you haven't given it an I, isn't it? You've just put in the cash flows. It assumes that any cash coming in is being reinvested at IRR. NPV is assuming that it's being reinvested at WACC. So let's look at this scenario. Look here. First of all, the return on both of these investments is plus minus 16% versus a WACC of 14%. So there's a 2% difference, isn't it? Number one. Then, when you look at the assets, the cash flows, you'll see that these investments are the complete opposite of each other. Project B has lots of cash coming in the beginning, and then less and less. Project A has no cash coming in year one, in fact, and then has more and more cash coming in later. So what the assumption is doing is, when I calculate NPV, it's assuming that this 7.5 million rand is being reinvested at 14 up to the end of year 4. Yeah. When I use IRR, it's being reinvested at 16.6. That's why we're getting a different answer. Because of the big cash flows in the beginning, and because of this differential here in the interest rates. Now, when we get these differences, it's always because of that. And we have to ask ourselves, realistically, if a company that has a WACC of 14 would be able to find an investment where the return is 16.6. Because, do you agree, this is cash coming in year one. At the end of year one, you're going to get that 7.5 million cash. And you need to reinvest it now, because you run the business, isn't it? And the question is, can you find another investment at 16.6? Or is it more realistic to assume that you can only find another investment at 14? And it's probably more realistic to assume 14, isn't it? And so therefore we do this calculation, which is MIRR. MIRR. Now, you're not going to like it. I'm going to explain to you how it's going to work. MIRR. What you're going to do is you're going to take each of those cash flows. So I'm just going to make up some numbers. Let's say cash flow. Let me work from a previous example. Let me see if I can cut and paste a previous. I probably can't. No, let me just explain to you how it works, and then I'm going to let you try it. So we have cash flows. Year 1, year 2, year 3. Yeah. What we're going to do to fix this IRR assumption is we're going to take each of these cash flows and we're going to push them into year 3. So I'm going to do future values at WACC. So I'm going to take each of the cash flows and I'm going to do future values at WACC. Then I'm going to have an MIRR cash flow thing to do where year 0 is my cash out. Yeah. Year 1 and 2 will be blank because I've pushed those cash flows into year 3. And then year 3, let me just make it a little bit neater. So year 0 will be your cash out, whatever it is. Let me make it an X so you know that it's a number. Year 1 will be nothing. Year 2 will be nothing. Year 3 will be all your cash flows at future value. And then you will recalc IRR, and that will give you, it's called modified IRR. Yeah. So remember the steps. You're going to take your cash flows and you're first going to take them forward at WACC. So in this example here, where were my cash flows? Is this it? Oh, it was before. In this example here, you're going to take each of these cash flows forward at WACC, isn't it? So if I do A for you, you're going to say 6.5, 2 years later, N is 2, I is 14%, what is future value? Then you're going to say 8 million, 1 year later, I is 14%, what is future value? And you're going to put all of these at time value 4. Then you're going to plug that into your calculator. So do that for me. I'm going to work through that one with you. So what we're going to do is we're going to do future values. So future values of this one, N is 2. Do you agree? From 2 to 4, 2 years later. And this one, N is 1. And this one, this is the future value, 9 million. So I want future values from you for 6.5 after 2 years at 14%, and 8 million after 1 year at 2%, at 14%. So give me those numbers, or work out those numbers, and I want a total. You've got some numbers for me? They do this whole katootie wootie. Did you get something like that? 84479120? Okay, so let's put them in here. So 8, was it just straight? 8447.4, and then the other one? 9120. So that adds up to? Okay, now to do the MIRR that I said to you we need to do, you're going to put the following cash flows in for project A. You're going to say year naught is minus 15 million. You're going to say year 1, 2, and 3 are null. And year 4 is 26, 5, 6, 7. .4. Do you see that I still have all the cash flows except I've put them all at a future value? So what have I done? I've changed the assumption to be that cash coming in is being reinvested at WACC. Do you see that that's what I've done? Okay, so if I change the assumption and make all the cash coming in being reinvested at WACC, then what is MIRR is what I want to know for project A and for project B. And then we will find that we don't have a conflict anymore. Okay, the answers they get to, you just look them up here. Don't page through the solution because it's like Excel sheets, pages and pages. I don't know, it just makes it confusing to figure out. You'll spend the whole time trying to figure out what they're doing. Yeah, so I just want you, did you get a number by the way? 15.36. Okay, so this one, MIRR, if you want to look at the solution, it is on page 69. So if I go all the way here, here it is, see. Okay, so you know whether you're right. And then the other one, you should be getting 15.26. So I want you to do the calc for the other one as well. You must get 15.26. This is horrible stuff. But you just never know what they will ask, isn't it, in the exam? And if they do ask it, you can imagine it being for quite a few marks. And then if you don't know how to do it, you get stuck. So remember, all we're doing is we're taking our cash flows forward at WACC. So our N's go the other way. So instead of being an N of 1, this N is 3, 2, 1, 0, like that. Those are my N's. To move it forward. And this is the answer that you should get for that one. 15.26. I want to see. I'm going to come round and see. It's a mission to do, but unfortunately it's the only way is to take those cash flows and do future values. So the same as what we had here, you're going to do here for project B, but now you're going to have 4 of them, 4 numbers that you're going to add up to get that future value in year 4. Do you want to know what the numbers are? Let's see if they have them here. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah. Oh. The numbers, the future value numbers are 11, 111, 7797, 11,111, 7798, it rounds up to 4560 and 3. And so these add up to a year 4 number, and the year 4 number for project B is 26,468 or 469. Let's just round it. And this here is these 4 numbers added together.
So now, once you get those, how do you look at the MI?
Then you do this same thing, but with this number as year 4.
Oh, okay. So
Because now I've put all the cash flows into year 4, so year 1, 2, 3 will be zeros. Year 4 will be the future value of year 1 to year 4.
So basically from year 0 to 3, you make it 0, and then year 4 you got that.
Yes, it's exactly the same as this that I had done for project A. It's exactly the same as this, except now I'm going to put this number in for year 4 instead of that number. Because do you agree it's the same? And you get 1526. Huh? Where do you get 71? Do you get those future values? Okay. Minus 15, eh? Then 0, 0, 0. Then year 4, 27,469 is what I have. Is that what you have? Sorry, there are extra bits there, but I've just left them out. I've worked in thousands. And you should get these MIRRs over here. Let me put smiley faces. These ones. Oh, look. So much for smiley faces.
What's your future value of the 3 mil one?
It's 3 mil. Because it is at year 4. Okay, so these are the answers for MIRR. But it's a big like exercise to get there, isn't it? You got them? Smiley faces. So now let me show you how they do it in their calc, because they do like all these big huge calcs in case you want to look then when you're looking. They first do the calculations of the future values, yeah? So those were they use factors. So they say 6.5 after 2 years, etc. Okay, then once they have those, they plug it in. Oh, they do it the same. They do these big things where they do it in Excel. And there's their answers, 1536. So here's the summary of project A and B. So when we were using NPV as our basis for our decision, we would have chosen project A, which was bigger NPV. When we looked at IRR, we got a conflict, and it told us we must do B. The conflict is because of the assumption of how the money is reinvested. And it only arises when there are big cash flows at the beginning, so they're going to be reinvested for quite long, and there's a differential between the return and WACC. The bigger the differential, obviously, the bigger the difference, isn't it? And then when we work out MIRR, what does MIRR do? It fixes the assumption of the reinvestment. With MIRR, I now am forcing IRR to use WACC as the reinvestment, isn't it? By taking all my numbers to future value. So MIRR, I take all my numbers to future value, and now I come back to A as being the one I should choose. Do you agree that the calculations are the same for NPV and IRR? The cash flows are the same. So why should it be giving me different answers? It shouldn't. We expect that it will give me the same answers, isn't it? And the reason for the different answers is that assumption of the reinvestment. So if I fix that assumption, then A is better. If my assumption of reinvestment was accurate, in other words, I can get 16.6, then I should go with B, because B is giving me bigger cash flows in the beginning. And if I can reinvest them at 16, 17%, then I should rather go with the one that gives me bigger cash flows in the beginning, isn't it? But if I can't, then I must go with what NPV says, which is I should go with A. Okay. So that's MIRR. So those were the things that I wanted to cover today. There will be an investment question in the exam. It may have some capital rationing. It may have and probably will have equivalent annual income. They may ask you to work out MIRR, or sometimes they don't ask you to work it out, but they ask you to work out IRR, and then they ask you why there's a conflict, and you need to be able to explain why that is. And then which one you would choose. And if there is a conflict, you would choose the NPV one, because it's better principle, which is reinvestment is at WACC. Yeah, it's a better assumption. Okay, what's the time check? Oh, we have half an hour. Perfect. That assignment question that I gave you earlier. Had a question 3. Question 3 for 12 marks. Remember that we talked about inflation last week? Do you remember that? Do you remember me giving you the formula for inflation? Which was 1 plus WACC equals 1 plus real times 1 plus inflation. Do you remember that? Okay, so this story is a company that Sam wants to start. He wants to do a tour operating business which would do 4x4 safari game drives in luxury lodges. He needs to purchase a 4x4. It will cost 450,000 rand. Over the 5 years, after 5 years, it will be sold for 200,000 rand. And SARS will allow it over 5 years, and then after the 5 years, we'll sell it for 200. Initial working capital, 50,000. We expect to run 60 tours per annum. The price per person will be 250 rand, and there will be an average of 12 people on each tour. The yearly fixed cost, including depreciation. What am I going to do with depreciation? Remove it. Whatever that means, remove it, because it's non-cash, is 180. The yearly variable cost is 60,000. Depreciation is calculated at 20% per annum on cost. We don't normally work with residuals in MAC. So we don't worry. They don't say anything about residual there. Do you agree? So although they've told us we're going to sell it for 200, we're going to just work straight line. We're going to work with 20% on 450 as being depreciation. WACC is 16. Current tax rate is 28. The net cash flow will increase with 7. Remember what I said to you about inflation. You have two options. You can increase each year with 7, or you can adjust WACC, isn't it? Okay. Increase each year with 7 or adjust WACC. Okay. I think in the solution they actually increase each year with 7, but I wouldn't do that in the exam. I would adjust WACC. It's easier. Okay, so let's see if you can do that. Do you agree that if you just look at this information at the moment, when you first looked at it, you couldn't see, but there's no changes from year 1 to year 5, isn't it? So year 1 to year 5, sales, variable costs, fixed costs will be the same. So when you do it, just put an arrow in to push it across, or at the top say year 1 to year 5 or something like that, so that you don't have to rewrite. Yeah? Okay, I want to see you practice this one. And then that's one less that we have to worry about when we are revising for the exam. We'll focus more on the other topics. Let's have a look then. I said what you should do. So this is their cash flows, right? Let's just look at what you've got and whether yours are the same. You've got a 450 and a 50 at the beginning, and then 50 coming back in at the end, and then a 200 coming in at the end. Okay. Then for tax, you've got, you just get rid of this blinker thing. Where's the tax? For tax, you've got a wear and tear, is it? A wear and tear of 90 that you've put in at 28. Yeah. And then you've got tax on profit, which is on the 30. And then you've got a recoupment on the 200 at the end. 200 at 28. Do you agree? Did you put the recoupment in? You've got the 200 coming in though, so you need to put that recoupment in. Okay, so what they did is they started year 1 with a 30, and then they increased it by inflation, increased it by inflation, increased it by inflation, increased it by inflation. Yeah, you didn't increase it by inflation. But then they discounted at 16% and you discounted at a lower rate, isn't it? What was your rate? 8.41. It would have been 1.16 divided by 1.07, isn't it? Which was 8.41. Okay. And when you discounted at 8.41, can you fix it for that recoupment and then discount it for me? At 28, yes. An out, yes. So there would be a 56 here recoupment. There would be tax on 30. Which is 8.4 also out. And there would be 25.2 cash in wear and tear, hey, for the 5 years. Is that what you had for tax? Yeah. 25.2 cash in, 8.4 out for your tax on profits, and then 56 out for your recoupment. Yeah. Okay. And then when you discount that at 8.41? 185. A negative or a positive? A negative 185. 558. 185, 598. Okay. Let me tell you what some of the problems are between yours and theirs. Do you see theirs is minus 245? The first problem is that I said to you that this 200,000 was the value in year 5. So if I have to put it in today's time value of money, I have to reverse inflation it. Do you agree? So this number, these two numbers, and this number, they didn't put inflation on those numbers. But because you're discounting at an after inflation, you kind of have. Do you agree? And that's what's causing the difference. Predominantly, I imagine it's this one, because this is your big one, isn't it? And if I was to fix it, I would take that number and say the future value is 200. What is the present value at 7% after 5 years? And I would bring it back to today's time value of money. Yeah. No, I wouldn't say 5, I would say 4, because we're bringing it back to year 1's time value of money, isn't it? Yeah. So I think it's just a combination of that. So my principle that I taught you, which is that you should be able to change the discount rate, works as long as all your money is the same time value of money. So if you look at their numbers are actually not correct either, because especially the 50 working capital would have come back at more with time value of money, isn't it? So that should have grown with inflation to come back. So that when you take it back with time value of money, it disappears again.
So they just basically put inflation on these.
They only put inflation in on sales, yeah. Whereas you have put inflation on everything because you've adjusted the inflation rate. Yeah. Okay. But in the exam, I still would suggest that you adjust the inflation rate rather than put inflation in, yeah. And just be careful with what they are saying. It's there. It's attached. So if you page, you'll see the solutions there. So there's the question, the solutions start there. Do you see? So if we look at this assignment quickly just before you go, what it was, because I'm not going to come back, I don't think, to the assignment. Oh, I might come back to that gamma. Question 1 was a valuation, a dividend valuation, valuing a minority share. Then question 2 and 3 we did today was investments, the capital budgeting and the NPV. Then question 4 is a merger, a little merger discussion question. Is the above a takeover or merger? 2 reasons why a merger would be beneficial, 3 reasons why they fail, bodies that regulate mergers. And then question 5 was also a merger. 2 companies, Gamma and Memento, they've decided to incorporate into a new company called Robust. So the 2 companies are going to merge into one. They ask you to calculate the shares that would be issued to the 2 shareholders. So in essence, we're doing a merger valuation, isn't it? From the merger perspective, how much is Gamma worth? How much is Memento worth? So that we can work out how much each shareholder should get in the new company, Robust. Yeah. We're going to talk about financing of mergers at some stage. We'll deal with this question then. Examples of questions. Okay, so I just wanted today to go and catch up some of the stuff we had missed. Next time, we're going to start with mergers. Yeah, next week.